Hey y'all, it's Sid. I have a new series that I wanted to announce called Crochet Talk that I'm going to start, where I give crochet advice and cover different topics that I feel are really important to know a lot of information about when learning how to crochet or improving your crochet skills if you are working on trying to advance the things that you're able to do and learn new things. And I feel like a lot of the crochet tips and tricks videos I do are very hands-on, and I feel like some things you can't really show with your hands. You just kind of have to talk and explain things. So with this new series, I would like to go over different topics that I feel are very important, that I would have loved to have known more information about when I was a beginner, and I feel like it could be very useful information to some of my followers. So without further ado, today's topic is going to be tension. So tension is something I have struggled with for a very long time, years actually, and I still struggle with it. It's very hard, and I feel like people don't talk about it enough with crochet. It's kind of like brushed over and almost seen like more of a common sense type thing, or like a beginner thing, and after you're a beginner, like, you should just know exactly like what tension to have, and I feel like that's not really true. Also, because when you are learning tension and you try to like look up YouTube videos and stuff on TikTok for like tips and such about tension, at least in my case several years ago, back when I was a lot more into tutorials and stuff, when I was learning a lot more, everything that I was finding was always telling you to practice having the same tension regardless of the project that you're working on. To practice always having holding the hook in your like tension hand, holding the yarn the exact same way, and the goal being to have the exact same tension no matter what you're making, no matter what yarn you're using, no matter what hook you're using. And I believed that for years, and that made it 10 times harder for me. I feel like if I had not believed that and listened to that, I would have struggled so much less with tension. And that's why I feel like I have some useful information to give, because everything I ever found was telling you have the same tension, like make it the same. No, that is not the case. Not every project should have the same tension. And the reason that I say that is because I personally do a lot of wearables. I make a lot of clothing, so that's what I have the most experience in. And based on my experience with doing clothing, not all pieces of clothing are made the same and have the same amount of stretch or give. Some are more stiff, some are more stretchy. It also depends on like how stretchy you want something to be, you know, and all the different factors go into that as far as how much stretch, the type of yarn you're using, your tension, the hook, etc. So for example, if you're trying to make something that needs to be nice and stretchy, such as a pair of pants, shorts, a skirt, any kind of bottoms, anything with a waistband, even anything with mesh stitches like little shrugs and sweaters that are meant to be nice and breathable, anything like that, you would want to have a looser tension since you're trying to make it stretchy, right? But if you're trying to make something that needs to be tighter and more stiff, such as a bra cup for a crop top, you want there to be as little holes as possible. You want those stitches to be real close together so that you don't have skin showing, you feel me? So you would want to have a tighter tension if you're trying to make something like that. And it took me practicing with many different patterns and all different types of clothing to really like realize that. I struggled for so long trying to have the same tension no matter what I was working on, and it never worked out that way. It was always different. Sometimes I'd like make a top, and even the two individual cups would be different sizes. I'd be making a crop top, just for example, say a size medium. One cup would be one size, and then the other one I made the exact stitch count as the other one, but it's slightly bigger or slightly smaller because my tension was slightly off. And that used to drive me crazy. So really, as opposed to just trying to practice having the same tension no matter what you're working on, what I recommend doing is just trying to have consistency depending on the project you're working on, if that makes sense. So learning how to judge the amount of tension that needs to be used on a particular project, and also learning how to keep that tension consistent. So knowing how to do a loose tension and also knowing how to do a tight tension and keeping it consistent so that when you're crocheting, you're not accidentally doing some stitches loose and some tight, because then if you're not consistent throughout the whole project, then it's going to be a little wonky. Things aren't going to turn out right. So the most important thing is just trying to keep the tension that you are currently using, depending on the project that you are currently working on, consistent. But that does not mean the next project that you make that you should have that exact same tension on that next project. You need to be able to learn how to judge what kind of tension you need to be using on that next project, and then keeping that tension consistent on that project, if that makes sense. If you can relate to me and you also struggle with tension and you're looking for ways to learn how to get better with your tension and ways to practice, I definitely recommend practicing squares. That's also a huge recommendation I have for anyone that is like very beginner to crochet. Before you try to worry about making projects, I always recommend practicing squares. It is great for beginners. It's great for any crocheter of any skill level, really. Not just for getting used to how to make different types of stitches, but for tension. That is why it is so important. A lot of crocheters get antsy when they learn in the beginning because they see all this cute stuff online that they want to make, and they have this long ongoing list of saves that they want to get started on making. So they kind of rush that learning process and make a few things that they're not very happy with, and then it gets stuffed in the corner of a closet and you never see it again. So before trying to put a whole lot of pressure on yourself to create a specific project, I always recommend squares. It also, I feel like, might make you more likely to keep crocheting if you're not putting that pressure on yourself. Because if you're trying to immediately jump into a project that's not really beginner friendly, you're most likely going to get frustrated and maybe give up, and then might even give up on crochet in general. But if you had just taken a few steps back and done a little bit more practice before trying to create a whole project, you might be more willing to keep crocheting because you spent more time practicing the fundamentals of crochet before trying to actually create something extravagant. So you're more likely to understand the project when you do decide to start making it, and you're more likely to finish it and not give up on crochet because you understand the concept before trying to jump into something that you don't really understand how to make yet. But as far as practicing your tension with squares, and not just like practicing squares in general as a beginner, it is a great way to practice your tension as well, because you're basically just doing the same repetitive stitch over and over again. And if you're making multiple squares, you're able to compare it to the last square and see if it came out the exact same size. So decide however long you want your initial chain to be. Just for example, say 20 chains wide by 10 rows high, and make a whole bunch of little squares in whichever, like I said, amount of chains and rows that you choose to do so, and then you compare it to all the other squares you've already made and make sure that they're all the same size. If they're all coming out the exact same size, then you know that your tension is consistent. If they're all coming out wonky in different sizes, you know that your tension isn't really consistent and that you're loosening and tightening as you're going, which is causing these squares to not turn out the same, even though you're technically making them the exact same size, but your tension is causing them to not be the same size. So that's a really good way to test if your tension is consistent or not, is to have to make the same thing over and over again and make sure it comes out exactly the same as the other one or other ones. And you can also get even more creative with it than that. Practice using different types of yarn and hook sizes so that you're using different things, and still see if your tension is just as consistent regardless of the hook and yarn that you're using. So maybe push yourself out of your comfort zone and try a different weight of yarn that you haven't tried, or a hook size that you haven't tried, and try making squares and see if they come out the same, and then that'll tell you if your tension is coming out consistent or not. But I hope that gave y'all some good information. If y'all have any other questions for me regarding tension, leave it down below. And if you have any other topics that you would like me to talk about next time on my new little Crochet Talks series, just let me know in the comments.